Well, you know, I had this unsuccessful career as a rock guitarist, which was wonderful. I mean, it was a wonderful period of my life. And as I started playing with all these people, it became obvious that there was the need for organization and discipline, all of these things that the other organizations had, but it was done because people wanted to. And so I think my big quest from that day to this has always been to identify what it is that transforms people from someone that need to be processed in an organization to people who actually want to. And when they have their own drive and their own decision to do it, how does that change entirely? So what I've done is basically what I do in all is the same thing, which is how do you change or remodel organizations so that they set people free to do whatever they wanted to do. I would assume always that these constraints which we removed, which in the businesses I call the boarding school rules, you know, which is what time you have to be here, how you have to dress, how you have to talk to people, how you go forward in life, etc. These have been lightened and hopefully removed, but in most cases at least they have been lightened. This person is now left in a situation where they decide, I think to a great extent, how they're composing their life. And so they're not they're not doing things because of a given rule. Fernanda, my wife, she says many times that she thinks that in some respects it's more difficult to work in a situation like that, because instead of someone saying, look, I want you here at 1, I want you at the meeting at 4, and give me this at 6, and then you're free, people are saying, solve this for me somehow. And you end up taking the problem home, as you would, let's say, if you're in a rock band and you're playing for 6 hours, but there's a note, there's something there which you don't like. And you wake up at 2 in the morning and you try to fix it. You don't wake up at 2 in the morning if you're playing in an orchestra where it just says, just play those notes, and then you go home. You go home, that the problem has gone away. So I think in some respects, the big change is that the responsibility falls squarely on your shoulder to see, do you actually want to do this? Are you doing this because you want to? And in this case, we don't have much control over leaving you free from doing these things. This is a difficult aspect of, and this is true, I think, even for the children at school. I don't think there's any profession I can think of where people would not prefer to have control over their destiny and their work. So that if we said, look, you have an option to do 3 films, which I gave to you and which are fully funded, and I tell you exactly what they are, and you're bored to death with doing it, you don't like the subjects or but you're going to do it. Would you rather do 1 film which has been your dream to do with half the budget and taking 4 times longer to do it? You would always choose the second one. And that's, I think, the essence of this whole issue of what it is that people want, is such that when you think of the kids who went to school with you who at 14 knew they wanted to be a violinist or a doctor, these kids never come up with these problems. They became a violinist or they became a doctor, and they are a doctor who is called at 3:30 in the morning, woken up from sleep to rush to a hospital to solve something. And you say, my God, how did someone choose that for their life? So there is something in them that drove them there. The business world, or the world of organizations, basically is left over with everyone else. And the everyone else is the people who did not have a specific talent, who did not recognize a specific need, and who fit in to an organizational world where people are telling them what to do. So if you say, what I want to do is I go to the restaurant, I work, I get out at 5, but why? Because at night I go to a choir, because I like to sing. So now I have to find a way as an organization to make those singing characteristics come into the job and not make the job something you make enough money for so that you can sing. When you're 32 or 41 and you realize that what you really wanted to do was to sing in a choir, now you're in big trouble, because now the whole system is set up so that you cannot afford the opportunity. By this time, maybe you've gotten married and now you have kids. You simply cannot anymore. What is it that I love about a choir? And part of it, you can say, is expressing a vocal ability I have. That's part of it. If your vocal ability were good enough, maybe you wouldn't even be in a choir. You would be singing alone and you would have a career. So let's suppose that it's not enough for that. You're expressing yourself, and you're expressing yourself in some manner which is very much from here to the outside, as there are so many other expressions which are the other way around. So expressing yourself from here to the outside maybe means that you've been in a job where you sit in the computer and you do certain things, and now you are selling, and now you're going out every day, and now you're seeing different people every day, and you find that a part of the expression that you had in the choir, you have when you go out and visit people and have lunch with customers, which you didn't know. And then you find that there are other variations of expression, such you find out that you're a very good joke teller, and your joke telling is not that far from your singing in a choir. And so the question is, how do you find these things come closer? At 17, 18, I was still playing in rock bands. By then, I had already started law school. And there was already a dichotomy. There was a bit of a shock between the two things. And at the same time, my father was almost 50 years older than I. He was very anxious that I should start getting involved in the business and that we could be in the business together for some time so that I could take it over from him and so forth. So I started much earlier than I should have. And so I was at the company very actively at 18, 19 and so forth, and going to the university less and spending more time at the business. And on one of these days we had a discussion about the problem that people came late to work, and what were we going to do about the fact that people were always late. And there was a deal with the union that people could be late 5 minutes a day. This was without any reduction in pay. And they were discussing how they were going to increase the controls so that people would come on time, and also increase the controls when people left. And they were putting in more modern time clock systems and so forth. And there was issues such as there was a line of people always waiting, and the line itself would take long, so that if the person was not late yet, they would be by the time they got to the time clock. And this discussion was there. And I kept thinking, I said, I come from this rock world rationale, which is I'm there because I want to be there. And I don't leave at the end, and it's hard to leave because I like what I'm doing there. And here we're trying to force all these people from all over town to come here, stand in line, and control them every time more with a time clock. So I said, no, this has got to be, there must be a better way to do this. So on the one hand, my question was, why is this such a bad job or such a boring job that these people are not coming on time and they don't look very happy? So if I put the two things together, we're doing something wrong. So either we just happen to be in the most boring business in the world, or maybe the business world itself is not able to find things that make people interested. And so we said, let's abolish all of the controls over what time people come and go and how long they work. And when we sat with the union, the first reaction of the union, because to them this was very strange, they thought about it and they said, wait a second, we have to regroup and think about this back at the union headquarters, because there's something wrong here. I don't know why you're proposing this, but it can't be right.
You cannot be trusted.
It can't be trusted. We don't know you, but we know business people, so this can't be right. You know that they came back, it was very, very interesting. They came back, we had a meeting, and they said, and the two people who were there to have this discussion, one of them was Lula, our future, who was to be our president of the country 30 years later. When we sat there, and one of the people called Vicentinho, who's been a congressman and all this time. And they said, you know what, people thought about this, and they realized that what you're trying to do, that the trick here of what you're trying to do, is that you're going to do away with the 5 minutes per day that we have a right to be late. Because if we can come anytime we want, where are our 5 minutes? Incredible, no? And I was just looking at them and I said, you know, and technically, I'm sure they were right, but I didn't know how to answer that. So how do I give you 5 minutes to be late if you can be as late as you want? And and so then we started a relationship. It was very interesting because at one point we had to have a second meeting, and we said, well, you guys came here to the plant, so we'll go to the union headquarters. And they said, but no business owner has ever been to the union headquarters. I said, doesn't matter, we'll go there. And we sat there, and they took a picture. They said, the union has existed here for 50 years, and in 50 years, no businessman has ever been here. And so we sat there and we took the conversation further. After a while, they realized that this was not a trick, and slowly people started giving in to this rationale. The relationship was, from then on, was always first class. We never had a problem with them. And we had, on our businesses, we have this business, metallurgical business, machinery business, has an average of 2.1 strikes per year. There are two or three moments per year. And I think now they were telling me, I think that this month we completed 20 years without a strike. Once your mother believes in you and thinks you can do anything, then you can do anything. And my mother lost 7 births between pregnancy and some that were born. And so when I was finally born, I was a bit of her messiah, you know. I was a prince who could not do anything wrong. And my whole life, everything I did was always perfect. And so I had a buildup of confidence, which helped, which I thought anything can be done. And no matter what goes wrong, we'll fix it somehow and so forth. So there's a bit of that. But the other part was that it seemed so obvious that I was not going to be able to spend 50 years of my life coming from a rock group, making people come on time and working against and it just seemed like this was so wrong and so awkward and so unproductive for everyone that any of these moves were just natural and they didn't require any courage whatsoever. You know that George Bernard Shaw said that everyone in their life only has one good idea, you know? And the idea that started at maybe before, but was impersonated in Semco, which then moved to other organizations, is just one central idea, that if you tilt at the windmills and you're a bit Quixotesque about not accepting that the windmills have to stay as they are, it's hard work, but someone has to do it. And there are people doing this, of course, in many walks of life. But it's really the essence of saying, if you throw yourself at it enough, you can undo the anthropological structures which make life so difficult, and which makes life so difficult to reach a linear level of satisfaction or happiness, etc. At work, starting at school, in a question of environment, in a question of a new town or a city, etc. The fact is that we've fallen into a structure where organizations and money are the structure which we have to be underneath, which are the umbrella of our lives. It's basically, and since the 80s even more, it's a world that finds it easier as humanity, or from a sociological standpoint, finds it easier to accept that organizations are structured and stiff in government, in businesses, in schools, in churches, in hospitals, and that there is really no other way but to take your life within these structures. And there are some people who are iconoclasts, let's say by nature, who rebel against this. So they either end up in prison or they sell coconut on the beach. But it's people who say, I can't do this. I can't believe this. And then there's some people, which I consider myself a part, which are the iconoclasts who would rather fight within the system. And being within the system saying, this is not an intelligent way of life. This is not something that can generate satisfaction. And so you look at people in line waiting to punch the clock, and they don't look very happy, and it's very early in the morning, and you say it's not possible that this is what they want. So finding a way to negotiate with the union so that they could take their kid to school first and show up anytime they want, has to be a better way. And so taking these organizations and saying, let's look at this from an intelligence standpoint and say, is this the only way that we know how to organize a hotel or a school or something, so that the guest and the kid and everyone is secondary because it makes it easier? And are we not necessarily generating a level of civilized society that is generically unhappy? I think the answer to whether I know it's better or not is one that I've never tried to answer myself. And that's why I very much like the idea of trying to set something up and then go away. Because how people are going to maneuver that in the future is probably more correlated to what they think happiness is. So we've tried to ask these people whether they like this better than what was there before. If enough people are saying they do, I have to assume that it is better, and not just a narcissistic response, which is I like it better because I'm not there. I don't see any conflict between having to do something and wanting to do something. It's just that they're very difficult to put into the same place. But and if you work on it and if you remove structures, the chances are pretty good that they'll end up in the same place. And exercising it has shown me every time that people would rather put these things together. There are very few people who would rather do things that is not connected to their talent or to their drive, etc. And so we tried a few things. For example, we had a program called Lost in Space. Lost in Space was a program that lasted many years where we would hire college graduates and we'd say, look, now you're going to spend 1 year here, and for 1 year, you do whatever you want to do. Don't even tell us. And then after a year, we'll tell you whether we want to hire you. Now you want to come late, you want to leave early, it doesn't matter. Because after a year, we'll tell you whether we want you for something or not. And that way, we started increasing the chance that they would find what they really want to do, or what has some connection with these hidden talents of theirs. It works for everyone in the sense that people, even the ones who left, and there were some who said, I don't want to work here and it doesn't work for me at all, they also discovered something, that they didn't want to work here at all, that it doesn't. So yes, it works for everyone. It doesn't work for the company always. One thing that we had with the Lost in Space program, which was interesting, was that we lost a lot of these people very early in the next 2-3 years. And a study that we did a few years ago showed that 80% of these had become CEOs or managing directors in other companies. And so we chose too well some of these people, and we weren't able to retain them. I think was wrong in the sense that we were picking too high. And I think that this is a very interesting case that we had. We had a joint venture partner, which was in the environmental consulting field, and they were headquartered in the World Trade Center. And on September 11th, they lost 92% of their company and of their people on the same day. And this is, as tragic as it is, it's a terribly interesting sociological exercise, which is the question: if I have a company and 92% of the company dies instantly, do I have the same company after that, and how long after that? And this is an experiment that the world has never had. And so we watched this very carefully. And the fact is that some 8 or 10 years later, this was the same company all over again. Now, if this is true, it's not very good news for the corporate world. And I had said before already that if you take a big company, actually once in a convention in The Hague, and we were talking to people from Shell and from Philips. And I said, look, you pride yourself that you go to the best schools, you try to find the best people. But I would say that if you stop here in Amsterdam on the Prinsengracht on this corner, and you hire the first 75,000 people who come here, you're going to have the same Philips as you have today. And this is crazy for people, because they're saying, no, wait a second, I'm looking for the best. No, you're not looking for the best. When you take the best, they are too good for you, they leave. You need a cut of humanity. 5% of Philips has to be lazy. 5% has to be extraordinarily genius. 35% have to be happier in the choir or in the bowling school than they are here. Because that is the essence of stability. What is at offer really there is not this first illusion of lots of money and so forth, because in essence, your stability, your ability to be happy is very, very small.
Your ability to be
in an organization like that. The chance that you're going to be happy is very, very remote. It's a catalyst to the things that disintegrate in your life. But it's not because you're an investment banker making $800,000. It's also because you're a cashier at the post office in a small village.
Yeah.
Both of them are places where your capacity to find happiness are very remote.
Yeah.
And the organizations didn't have to do that. They don't have to be that way. So I guess this is the whole essence of it. School does not have to be boring and difficult. Learning is absolutely magical. Every one of us is always excited with the idea of learning. School just takes that excitement completely away and transforms it to something that's terribly boring. But it doesn't have to be. The act of learning is wonderful. The act of working seems to be very necessary to human nature. The act of producing something with your talent is wonderful. Doing that in the post office by stamping the envelopes is what's wrong. So the one that's there, the school that's there, the hotel that's there is a variation of this invitation to look at things and say, don't accept things they are because they are or because they've always been that way. I'm always imagining myself as someone who, as an enzyme, opens the architecture of an organization. And then themselves, the people who are there, they then structure this in a way that they feel comfortable with. And it's a way of acting to demolish obstacles. Always that the schools are set up for the comfort of the parents and by extension, the people who run the school. And that the essential object of school, which is to make learning a magical experience and to increase the retaining of knowledge, that is almost impossible within the structure that was created. And the structure that's created is one that makes it easy to manage large groups of kids. But managing large groups of kids is something that a club does, a concentration camp does, a prison does, and so that's why so many elements of these other entities are prevalent in a school. And the one which is to make it magical to discover new things, that's a minority issue in schools. So the structure is obviously wrong. I think basically when after this, some of the programs we had, such as Lost in Space, where we were taking in from the schools kids who had been taught to be submissive from very early on, and were coming to us and asking us, what am I supposed to do? When am I supposed to do this? How am I supposed to do this? As more of this happened and as we grew, it became obvious to me that we needed to start earlier than the business, because the business itself, we changed enough that it had, some of the constraints were gone. But this influx of kids were coming in already with all of these constraints. So we thought, oh, now we need to go back. Do we need to go back a few years? And as we looked at it, it became obvious we need to go back to 2-year-olds, because already at 2, we're starting to create all these constraints. So if we're going to undo them, let's undo them already in the very beginning. So it became obvious that school was a next natural step once you'd looked at how you can reorganize a business. But it was useless with your continuous influx of people who were just learning to stay within the box. I had an opportunity to take over one of the largest hospitals in São Paulo, and it was a public hospital, so it was very seductive, the idea. And as I went through the hospital, I kept thinking, I can fix this and we can do that, and why are we doing this? I didn't do it because,
well, why not?
Because it was juggling, it was competing with other opportunities. I never had any doubt that if I threw myself at the hospital for 4 or 5 years and was there 20 hours a day, etc., that it would work. I don't have that. I don't have that doubt, and nor much the need to prove it. I'd very much like to incentivize these people, some people, to do it on their own. Another one was the state penitentiary system for youngsters, and they wanted me to be. I got invited to be the president of that entity, and that entity had at the time 75,000 juvenile delinquents in juvenile prisons. It's obvious to anybody that that's a very stupid system, that it's not difficult to fix, but it's very hard work, it's very complex, it's very risky, but it's not difficult. And the same thing when I had the opportunity to run for mayor of São Paulo. So these are all just variations of the same thing. So you say, oh, I'm going to fix the hospital, I'm going to fix the penitentiaries, they're going to fix the city. There's an enormous amount of arrogance in the idea that you can go out there and fix it on your own and it's going to be of any use. So one, I have very much very present the idea that these are very complex structures, very sophisticated structures that are there for historical reasons, have an enormous amount of pressure around them from other groups and tentacles, and that undoing it is a big, big job, and you have to give up everything else just to do that. Second, it's almost obvious that even if you do that for some time, if it is because you are putting force into it and you're questioning everything and changing everything, it is also true that once you step away, that entropy will bring it back very close to what it was before. It started with this feeling that I would have loved to do something at the hospital. I would have loved to take over the penitentiaries. I would have probably enjoyed the experience of running one of the largest cities in the world. But some of this has to do with vanity. Some of this has to do with ego. You know, the feeling that I'm going to be the mayor, I'm going to do. And this is a dangerous territory, which I'm always careful about. The other one is that if it's not sustainable in the end, because a new mayor will come in and undo everything you did, because the people who are funding the hospital that are not you, the governor, the new governor is going to change and abolish everything you did. But these are very frustrating experiences that I don't want to start with, because I don't want to give in to my ego to such a point that I'll do it for a while and then see it all go down. The consequence of many projects has taken me to this feeling, to this will, and now to a project of starting a village, a village of the future, or a living area that fixes some of the issues as they exist today. And that we called for a time, I don't think we call it City of the Future, but we're talking about an area that affects all of the aspects of living together. Because the business does one, the schooling does another, the hotel does a little bit, the environment does the other one. But now it's a very ambitious project, I think, to try and put this all together in one city, in one village, and say, if we were to design from scratch a living situation, what would it be like? Over time, something where you are able to slowly bring people in who on their hand influence all of this and then generate something which is not your own, is my experience with Semco and with the school and so forth. If I go, I haven't been to the school in São Paulo for 2 years. The factory you're going to go visit at Semco, I've never been to. I don't know where it is. And so I don't have a real interest in the retail version of these thoughts, because they're going to be developed by local people, and the people there will make it theirs. It will always, everything will always boil down to what my 3-year-old with me was sitting in the bathtub one day, and he asked me a question at 3. He said, why do we exist? And this, why do we exist at 3, is the same question we ask at 93. And it's a question we never answer. And one of them is surely to have a feeling that you've left something, that you're creating something, not left behind as a legacy, but that you're creating something that is of some use to anyone. So putting together a city that solves some of the problems that cities have, putting together a school that solves some of the issues that schools have, is useful to somebody somewhere. It's a vicious circle. You have a feeling that you contribute to your tribe, wherever it is and however you define it, but you're contributing to your tribe. And on the other hand, there is a hospitality of the tribe and yourself, which is what we do with our lives. And so in the end, it is the feeling that you're doing something of any use is the essence of this meaning of life. I would have to be enjoying the fact that they are paying homage to me. I have never gone in my life to receive an award. And people put out awards all the time, and I look and I receive an email and say, please come here and receive your award. I've never gone to receive an award. It's of no relevance to me. You're never going to find here, as I said, you don't find any award in this house. You won't find any of my books in the house because I'm ready to move on. I don't want to carry this weight of the past and of people that recognize or that give value to this. I'd be very unhappy if 5 years from now you come back to this hotel and people say, the Ricardo Semler hotel and his wife's hotel. I want people to forget that completely. In the beginning, it's not easy to do, but over time it is. Because if you think about me sitting here up in the mountain, thinking up a new hotel or a new city or something that I think is of some use, is some fun, is some good use also of whatever talent I think I have, it makes absolutely no sense for me to do this and not let anyone know that it exists. Once it exists, however, I'm not looking for the recognition that that is mine. But every time the people come here and say, now I want to give you a prize for it, no, I don't want the prize. Now I want to have dinner about it. I don't want to have dinner about it. Yeah, of course. I mean, everybody wants to change the world in that sense, or wants to leave behind a world that's slightly better than it was there. And very few people have the good fortune of being able to do it. And it's a combination of things. Among other things, people who are having to work the whole day for their subsistence have much less of an opportunity. So many of these opportunities that are available to me with relative ease is something that I make use of. And there's obviously a vanity concept, or there's an advantage to ego to do anything that you think is good, and by looking and seeing out there. But the small vanity of just making this come back to you in terms of recognition, that's the one that's unnecessary to me. But the bigger one, to feel that your life was worthwhile and that you did something which somebody used somewhere for somewhere, that one's good. So I'm much more interested in getting it started and seeing how people are going to make it, so that with this thought, the chance that it's going to go wrong doesn't exist, because I wasn't comparing it with right. I think that the criticism, which is not in the sense of negative, just people want to be critical, but the critical evaluation, even of the very intelligent people who look at this, is one, that there's a megalomania involved with everything, because the ideas and the projects are big. And so people say, the guy's a megalomaniac, he wants the whole city, then the whole world, then the whole universe, and so forth. But
aren't you?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I don't mind the idea of megalomania, because megalomania is really associated with doing something in a big way. And I don't have, I think, enough time available to do everything in little ways. And so making it bigger is about the same effort as to make it small. The fact that the business itself, that Semco makes money, to the conservatives bunch, is just uncomfortable, because it would have been much more comfortable, as it was in the beginning, to say this is never going to go anywhere, these crazy ideas. Soon the company won't exist anymore. And the fact that it's been there for 30 years doing that is uncomfortable. It's not a reason to say, well, he's doing this just because he made money, because when it started, it wasn't big at all. It started with 100 workers, with small value and so forth. And people were just saying, no, this is a crazy idea to hear what the worker wants to do. Comes anytime he wants. Of course, this is going to go bust. The fact that it didn't go bust, people kind of, were looking at that and saying, I don't know why that didn't go bust, but this school is not going to go anywhere. If you think also about what are the issues, the problems, the obstructions we have in our world of business or in the school or in the hospital, etc., they're very similar. And they are the same in a village or in a city or in the place you live. They are a balance, finding a balance between your personal life and somebody else's, these spaces that are between you. How do you together manage something when you have very different worldviews? How do you respect the context, but at the same time know that you are a predator and you're going to have to make use of that to survive as a human being? How do you have the use of money with the freedom to do whatever you want with it, and at the same time create a respectful lower barrier for the people who have nothing? So it's the balance between all of these elements. And the city is the final and the largest variation of how human beings find a balance between all of these conflicts. And that these conflicts are there, and you say, can I use money to distribute it in a way that is not anarchic, is not Marxist, and is not right-wing, which is each one solves his own problem? Can we build something that is a political, financial, and neighborhood situation that makes people live together better in this new world as we know it? Because there's this enormous amount of information of our legacy that is not useful for this, but the nature of how we live together is fundamental. So can we make security an issue of everyone exactly the same? Can we do that if I have big walls or large walls in my property, and if I have two guards protecting me, and one of those guards lives in the slum that I'm trying to protect the people from? And these inequalities of rationale, of concept that are in place, are they necessary? And so my feeling is the same as in the school. Is it necessary for the kids to hate learning? The question is, can you set living conditions that on a human level have the same level of dignity for everyone? So can I live in a town, in a city, where security is everyone's problem and is shared equally, so that my walls can be destroyed? So by doing that, by any contribution we can through the foundation, we diminish that gap. Now, is everyone closer to buying Jaguars? No. But the fact is that they're further from not being able to pay for their own food. And so this diminishing of this gap is what we can do. We start running out of possibilities of doing things because we don't want to be paternalistic. Because if we said, let's just take these hundreds of people here that are the village, and let's distribute our wealth among everyone, what is left after 10 years is probably nothing.
I understand, yes.
Because again, if you say we're in the world, we're competing with the story of the 1%. If you take the wealth of the 1% and you distribute it among the other 99, there's a calculation from Rubini that it's a 7-year fix. And in the 8th year, you're exactly where you were before. But having money in a country or in a place where people have much less, and where the state doesn't make up for that difference, is always one where you are being called constantly to be paternalistic and to be the one who says, well, you see, I did this. It creates the new pressure to be paternalistic, to continue this and to be accepted, and it's a mutual game with that village as well, which we don't want to play. So when we go into the church or we go into the bar, nobody knows who we are, and they have not the slightest idea that that school is only there because we gave the money. And now it works well for everyone. We all know that the valuable ones have to do with balance, finding a balance for yourself between the things you think you have to do, the things you want to do, the things that you controlled around your life, that balance issue. There's that whole elusive word of happiness, which no one is able to describe well, but it has to do with a certain homeostasis. And that's why I'm connecting a bit to balance. To feel that the changes you make around you, they're always creating a balance that is higher, that is lower, etc. But that there's a feeling that you're in the place where you should be, or the place that you like. And I've been following now for years a study from the University of Chicago that is trying to measure happiness. And that's been a very interesting exercise, because people, by being subjective about it, they say, well, happiness, everyone has a different definition, and so it's not important, I can't do it, and so it's very personal. But the fact is that when you start measuring contents of dopamine, of endorphin, of serotonin, when you start measuring physical and physiological aspects of people, you can start giving numbers to what you would call happiness. And that the same way as animals that are safe and that are content.
No stress.
Yeah, no stress. They move a different amount of hours per day. They sleep a different amount of. That is also true for us as animals. For me, the idea of success, power, and money together has never been a motto. It was just a realization that this was so important to people in general. But success, the idea that success is connected to money, to me is already a strange combination. It's there's a very small correlation between success and money in any case. There's a strong correlation between money and power, because we've configured society in such a way that so many things can be bought. But success fits into the other trinity of balance, of security, certainly, because it's much more secure in our society to have a bank account than to have none. But it's not by any means that this will enable you in any of the other factors. But I think that people that imagine that success, money, power, etc., are useful only believe in this for a while. It's very difficult to imagine that somebody believes in this over the long run, because there's so many opportunities and examples to see that there are so many important things that you can't buy with any of this. The balance issue, if you think about Chinese medicine, the balance issue is the one that solves the health issue, which so many people bring up and start bringing up every more as life goes on, to say that health is one of the fundamental aspects. There's no amount of money that will solve a health issue, even if it brings you more comfort. But the health is that same issue of how did you get out of balance. It's really how the Chinese see it. And you got out of balance because you didn't trust someone, or because the structure of what you thought was important in your life wasn't true. Yeah, and it was about 7 years ago, I think. And I was coming up here to the house from São Paulo, and I was at about 110, 120 kilometers per hour, so it was relatively fast, but nothing out of control. And a truck crossed the road by mistake. The truck looked, and it was dark, didn't see me, and thought there was enough time or something, and crossed the road entirely. And so I started braking, but the fact is I hit the last 1 meter of the truck. And it was a sand truck with a metal chassis, and it came through the car, and it hit me here, and then the seat broke, and then the car turned over. And it was a very interesting sequence, because there was complete silence after this. The car wheels turn, etc., and everything stops, and it's silent. I was already in the asphalt on the concrete itself, because the cover of the car had gone. And I was stuck between this car, because the car was on my back. And then I passed out, and then when I came to, apparently about 20, 30 minutes later, I heard a conversation. I woke up because I heard a conversation of these policemen outside the car. And they said, no, no, he's dead. You can call the morgue. Just have the morgue send the car over. And so I thought, I'm dead? That's a strange thing. And I said, oh, I'm sure that I'm dead. And I had my face was in this, it was all glass and there was blood flowing and so forth. And then I tried to move my finger. And I said, I'm moving my finger, so I'm probably not dead. And then I did this, and then the guy said, oh, he's moving his finger. I said, but he's going to be dead in a few minutes, don't worry. We'll just call the morgue. So then I thought about that, and I said, listen, what could be happening here? And then I said, let me try and move my toes. Then I'll have a good idea whether at least I'm going to be a tetraplegic, what's going to happen here. And I moved, and it seemed like I was moving my toes and moving my fingers. And then I relaxed a little bit, and then the car went down some more, with another 2-3 centimeters, the whole car came down. And at one point they realized that the situation was different, and then they showed up with saws and electric and welding equipment, and it took 3.5 hours to pull me out of the car. And when I got to the hospital there, the guy took me to the diagnostics and so forth, and then he sat with me and he said, look, you have 13 important bones in your face. Here, the nose, the jaw, the this and that. And I said, which ones did you break? He said, all 13. And he said, so now this is going to take a while. He said, we have to operate on different portions and so forth. We have 5 different specialties of surgeons here and so forth. And so they started a process. They did 14-hour surgery to reconstruct and so forth. And then he said, I'm going to take from your hip because you've lost your global continent, which is the eye has fallen. And so we need to put that up with parts of your hip. And I said, how am I going to play tennis? He said, no, you're never going to play tennis again. I said, no, stop. Let's find another solution. And then he went to me and he came back and he said, well, there's a titanium which has never been tested. I said, that's the one I want. And okay, so we put the titanium, and so he put in, I have 27 large pieces of titanium in my face. 43% of the face is titanium. And so he put it all together and then finished this operation. And then and the next day I said, I'm going home. He said, no, you're not going home. We need you for 10 days. And I said, you're not going to do anything here. I'm going to become sick. What it showed me was that, one, I was never meant to die in this thing. You know, when I look at it, it was obviously, and they, as doctors, of course, they say, well, this, they missed by 2 millimeters, that by 4, you would have lost this, you would have, but the fact is it wasn't meant to be. But what it did for me was to realize that my life was at an enormous speed. I was busy, I was doing everything, I was on 2 phones, I was on all the boards and things and so forth, and that what I understood that to be was that it was time to stop and pay attention to the essential things in life. So I stopped for 3 or 4 months, everything. Had no more contact with the company, with anything whatsoever, because I wanted to understand what this meant. And then I started moving away and undoing things. I left all of the boards that I was on. I gave up the day-to-day of almost everything I was doing. I didn't have more cell phones. I didn't have a car for years, which was just to pay attention to what was basic. These issues of this balance, which wasn't there, this issue of security, of being part of a system, or being part of a family, being part of something that's in place, and this issue of love. And then that's when Fernanda showed up in my life shortly after. And I don't think I knew her. I think I knew her, yes. But basically it came to mind very quickly that this is what this meant. And within 3 months after I met her, we were married, after we realized that we were going to be together and so forth. And that created a complete new microcosm there, which left some of these other experiences as things that had a sequence and that could be dealt with, but which were not the only origin. We'd been living for a few years already in the country, with kids growing and so forth. And one moment I'd had Some years before, when on a birthday when I was teaching in Boston, that I'd gone to a cemetery and walked around, and it was a very beautiful cemetery, and I went through one time around the cemetery, and I looked at all of these tombstones, and there was a description of this and this person and what they'd been and what they'd done and so forth. And when I came around, I thought to myself, what do I want to be remembered for? And I started walking again. And by the time I'd come around the second time, my question is, why do I want to be remembered at all? And how do I change my life depending on the fact whether I do want to be remembered on something or whether it's not that important to be remembered? And this came to me much clearer when I saw the kids, and I kept thinking, if I have around the house, if I have mementos, if I have reminders for myself and for them of things I've already done, is this an advantage, or is this a weight that I'm carrying that makes it much more difficult for me to start new things from scratch? So the fact that I had books in 38 languages, I had 1,000 and something articles, I had video cassettes of 20 years ago of TV programs I'd done, and the house was pretty much full of this. And I thought, this is going to be a weight over the kids, because they're going to have to compare to this. And there's no reason for to compare to this, because there's nothing there for them. And I myself, I'm looking at this, and I'm reminding myself that I did this, I did that, they thought this, they thought that. And so I said, I need to free myself of this burden in order to start or look at things completely fresh, and to look at these kids also completely fresh. So with Fernanda, we decided to put up a large vat, which is still there, and we put in an enormous amount of wood. And we spent hours and hours throwing everything into the fire, anything we could find. All of the books in any of the languages. We knew that we would never find them again, because some were in Slovak or in Chinese or and so forth, only editions, videos of 20 years ago, radio programs that I'd done. And so we threw it in, and we watched all of this burn for hours and hours. And it was life-changing in the sense that it was a great relief to realize that I don't have to carry this around. I'm not putting this as a pressure on my kids. Even the older ones, they don't know what I do. And one of them, the 9-year-old, thinks I'm a writer. The other one thought I was a rock guitarist, which was great. Of course, he could never see me on YouTube, so something was wrong. But he probably thought I was a Ricardo Semler, but not very good. And the other one thought I was a writer, but the fact is I've never taken them to the company, to the factory, to anything, because I don't want them to live with this idea that somehow they should become businessmen, or they should become writers, or they should become something. So Pedro, the one who's 9, until recently always wanted to be a cab driver. So that sounds good. So he's going to be a taxi driver. And Olivia, the very little one, she's always cleaning everything, so he decided that she was going to be a cleaning woman, and that he'd be the taxi driver, and he'd pick her up at the end of the day of work. So they live with these variations which are theirs, but the fact is that not having this weight of certificates or of things of what you were in the past makes it much easier to move on. I was very convinced that it would do good, and there's some nostalgia involved every time anyone cleans out their closet and gives away some 30% of their clothes to someone else. And there's a nostalgia of, you remember when you used that jacket and so forth. But there's the second one, which is more important, which is the feeling that that's going to do somebody good, considering you're not using it anymore. And so I think it's a similar feeling, that there's a nostalgia of knowing that that book will never be seen again by anyone. But on the other hand, that I'll be free of the idea that that book will not be seen by anyone, because it doesn't impose on me. It doesn't define me in any respect. I was very serene. It was something we agreed to do. It wasn't on the spur of the moment. I think it took us a few days to organize it. So it was a bit premeditated. It was not an impulse. Every time I get close to operating something or to putting something together, it affects my comfort level very easily, and my frustration level rises very quickly because I don't have much of a patience. I end up changing things as we go along, and that's very disturbing for the people who are trying to do something sequentially or in an ordered fashion. So I try to keep away from putting things together because my frustration level rises very fast when I feel that either people are not paying attention or are not doing this as they had promised to do, or people are not keeping their end of the bargain, and that drives me out of my comfort level. But I think basically promise something or have me understand that they're going to be doing something and not do it, and not in a sense not do it right or wrong, because making the mistakes and doing it completely wrong, I don't think frustrates me. It's when my feeling that the person knows that they're not planning to do it, and they're just trying to get to a stage where I just shut up or I go away. That's the part I think that rises my frustration a lot. Yeah. People making, let's say, mistakes is not that important because I'm not sure about mistakes. I'm not sure in any of these situations that I for sure know the right answer. I know what I believe in. But the fact that people take it in a completely different direction doesn't bother me. If there's an explanation, and some of them there are, some of the explanations are not either technical or mathematical or logical, which is why I love to go into sacred areas and temples and churches, et cetera, because there's nothing to change, because that's an evolution of a rationale.
It's too big to deal with.
No, I find it interesting just to look at that. You know, I keep thinking, why isn't there a format of church where anybody is able to go and is not subject to the rituals or the strictures of any one given church? And so you say, well, do you accept the idea that there's a larger being? It's, oh, I do, okay. Well, is there a church where you can go where you don't have to kneel first and do this later, or cover your head or undo your head? Or is there one that is not subject to humans interfering in the process, so that you can have a direct line with divinity in a temple? So, you know, this is the process that I go through. But then understanding why the Muslims do it this way in 5 days, 5 times a day, it's all very interesting.
But you can build this in your own city.
I could build one for my own, yeah, and if somebody shows up, that's fine. And if no one shows up, it's equally fine. We have a ethanol business, which is it's one of the largest ethanol companies in the world. And it started with me writing a little paper and saying, you know, it's not possible that Brazil is not able to produce a large-scale ethanol plant. So we had the idea, put in some people together, went around the world, and got a lot of people involved to put up the money. This was 4 years ago. Bill Clinton put in money, all kinds of people put in money around the world, the guys who started America Online and so forth. The guys from Sun Microsystem, Oracle, a lot of people put money into it. So we started. And it became a big ethanol business based on the idea of a cluster of 10 plants in the same place with an enormous alcohol duct, and buying 3% of the port of Rotterdam and 3% of the port of New Jersey. So this was a megalomaniacal plan of taking over the whole world. And as soon as it started going places, people said, well, do you want to be on the board? You're going to be, I don't want to be anything. I just want to watch this happen. It then became a very big company, and was a company worth $2 or $3 billion a year and a half or 2 years ago. And I went to have lunch with the president. And we had lunch and we talked and so forth. When the luncheon finished, I had set up with Fernanda to go to the movies at 4. And this was about 2:30. So he said, don't you want to run over here and see the company? You've never seen the company. It's only 2 blocks away. We own the whole building. We have 2,000 people. Don't you want to see them? I said, I have no interest whatsoever in seeing the company. I'm going to get there, and I'm sure there's floors and floors with people with computers. They're going to ask for my identity to get in, and I'm going to go up and I'm going to say hello, 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 people, 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 computers, computers, computers. He said, well, let me show you at least the photographs of the places, of the factories, of the mills. And I said, I know what a mill looks like. It's also, but ours, I'm sure it's a bit different, but I have no interest whatsoever. So this company, which is now a $9 billion company, of which we have a small part, is a company I don't know exactly where they are. Many times they've offered to have company planes. Let's just go, in an hour you can go see this, just see it from the air. I have no interest whatsoever. And I never was at the headquarters. There's been a new president for three years who I don't know.
It's your company.
It's partially my company. At that time, it was only my company. But I have no interest in how things look at the end. I have very little interest in going and seeing the kids. You go to the school and now they're going to sing for you and they're going to show how they know Beethoven and how they use the iPad. It's not relevant to me. I just want to create a situation, an opportunity, a vehicle for people to do their thing in a better way. This is my research room here. Well, I had this unsuccessful career as a rock guitarist, which was wonderful. I mean, it was a wonderful period of my life. But it was very interesting because it showed where the limitations are and why sometimes you want to do something because you want to, but the combination of talent and time is not right. And letting it sit there and not doing it is an important part. That playing for myself, of course, is interesting. It's not meant for third parties, but it became an exercise, a bit of a research into finding out how to perpetuate a little bit or how to extend the life of classical music, which I love very much. And I'm using a modern rock world or a contemporary music world to try and find the DNA of musicians, of classical musicians that are losing their space and that are dying out slowly. And so trying to answer the question of how do I take a piece of Mendelssohn or of Haydn and how do I create some kind of a mechanism, an enzyme again, that could be used by people who really do have talent or who have audience to recycle some of the genius of classical music that's dying slowly. And so I take pieces of, like Mendelssohn, for example, and I try to pull out of there mathematically a new score that tries to answer the question of if Mendelssohn were here in 2012 in this studio with electric guitars and drums, how would he produce that same music, not something else? How would he produce that same music, but not simply by taking a guitar and playing his notes on a guitar? The question is, in his DNA of this mathematical permutation of his score, how would Mendelssohn create this same music today? I think I'm looking for genius in that sense. I'm looking for his genius, which touches me already immediately, intuitively. But I'm thinking, could that genius be made contemporary? The contact with genius in all of these fields is enlightening. It's insights that are available to you and that I could do by going to a college and hoping that one of the professors has these genial insights into the world. But it's for sure that Mendelssohn does, and he's available right here. Jung is probably the person that would come to mind as the person I think understood or completed or defined man in the way that I find most genial. Jung would probably be the one person that I can think of that has an unending sequence of insights into the human mind and nature, etc. Jung is always, I think, the idea that you're not alone and that this integrated consciousness and the fact that you're doing something which somehow is affecting someone else and that people who are thinking something together affect you in ways that you don't know, and that you accept the idea that there's something that's not esoteric, but at the same time is completely untouchable. that this has to be respected because this has an enormous impact on your life and you don't realize why. So you call it destiny, or you call it unconscious.
Nobody knows that you funded the church.
The collective, maybe that. But because no one knows that you funded the church, there's some feeling, there's some thought of someone who went into that church that is going to come back to you, but you have no idea how. And this movement of energy and so forth, which is so way beyond our capacity to understand, that when I think Jung is one of the people who had the greatest genius to understand that exists and to try and put words to it, which religion does in a much simpler fashion, and which is of course subject to all kinds of boxes. But the idea that there's always something there, and that things happen for a reason, and that people show up in your life at a certain time for a reason, this, I think, Jung had the greater genius of accepting that this could be classified in terms of science and not understood or defined, but classified to say that there are energies, that they're collective in consciousness that affect things that you thought you were doing, but it's not really you're doing. That car came out of nowhere, that truck that came out of there, that they're all there for a reason, which is not as simple as one white-haired, bearded God who's sending the truck all the time after you. You know, that there's something there, which could also be that, no one knows, but the fact that there is something there that is much greater than us. That the whole project of the Melos development, which you want to do of the new city or township, etc., it has to be anchored on some attractions and some things that have economic sustainability. So here, 80% of the people that work at the hotel live in a very short radius around the hotel. So that's very unusual. No hotel normally does that. And we have, I think, 8 or 9 people only who come from outside. And we wanted a little bit of people from the outside to put some oxygen into the system. But the amount of people who are from here and have never done anything like this before is the great majority of the people. So the first thing is, of course, that it generates a whole economic environment around the hotel. It brings up the level of the people who live here, and therefore it will affect their family and then their kids and on and on. These are already kids, people who work there and whose kids might be studying at the Lumiere school. And so it develops, for this sense of place and for the township, it develops a cornerstone of an economic activity, which then makes it possible to start the other developments. I'm very concerned always about being paternalistic. You know, I don't give out things. I don't receive people to give out favors. So that's why we have the foundation, which is trying to be run always very professionally. The thing that I'm trying to avoid is that you have a small village situation. You have an enormous difference in wealth. You can easily have a situation, a feudal kind of situation, where you have the guy on the castle at the top of the mountain and the village down there, and you give out favors and you give out money and you prefer these people, and if the person's not good to you. And so what we did was, by creating the foundation, which has professional people, which runs along lines that are not paternalistic at all, it tries to create jobs, it tries to create the ability for these people to create their own value and their own jobs. Over time, in 5 years or in 10 years or 15 or 20 years, people will realize that the foundation is there for a structural reason, institutional reason, and they'll learn to dissociate it from us. The fact that I have this with my kids, they'll realize, for example, at some point, they do realize that they have things which other kids don't. So, for example, Pedro, who is 9, he spent 3 years at the public school. The public school, there are lots of people there whose parents make per month what he spends in a day. We try to make them and us live without any effort to dissimulate the fact that there's a large difference in wealth. But in the way we live and the way they live, there are a lot of issues which are absolutely common to us.
there are security issues, or how clean the water is, or whether there's a postal system in the village, or whether the road and so forth. So there's a lot of items that are common. And that there are other ones that we can work with or together that do not have to do with wealth. But the ones that have to do with wealth, we don't ever pretend, and I never make an effort to downgrade our life or our expenditures, etc., so that other people will feel better about the fact that they don't have. I'd love to upgrade the lives of others without downgrading mine, which is a different, it's just another way of bridging the gap. But bridging the gap by saying, I'm going to be Franciscan and a monk and I'm going to give up everything, I'm going to be here, is totally useless from a social standpoint. It's nothing from an economic standpoint. And it's just the way things were set up. The fact that if I spend 60 or 70% of my income to try and make other people raise their base, that's fine too. But I also don't want to get involved in the sense of recognition. I don't want recognition for it. The amount of other things that we do in terms of philanthropic work or expenditures that they don't know about, that nobody knows about, is very big. And they will never know about it, and it's totally irrelevant. And so even if there's a little bit left, there's a little bit left because I'm very much in their eyesight in many respects. And I can't do very much about that. But the fact is that it is not a paternalistic relationship, even if they still don't understand the difference entirely, because it takes more time for them to see. To have the one school which is here and to give money to that and immediately make it better would be paternalistic. It's again the guy on the hill who gave the money, that's why this school is better. So what we're trying to do is to prove that there's already enough money in the public school system, and that if the concept were changed, the education would be much better with just the same amount of money, with the same teachers. What we're trying to do with the public schools is to make the public schools much better than they are. This public school that we took over is...
What do you mean took over? Is it yours?
No, we took over the management of it with a contract with the local authority. So we have an extended period, 10 years, in which we are responsible for running the school from a pedagogical standpoint. They have their teachers, they run the schools from an economic standpoint, along the lines of our concept. This school has a number of advantages over their other schools, and has a relatively long waiting list at that one school. And if we were able, as we're planning to do, to increase that to 10 schools or 100 schools or 300 schools, we end up bringing up the level of a public school very much. And so hopefully we diminish the gap that way. I was remembering that I went to Amsterdam in 1983. So this would have been almost 30 years ago, right? And I went to address a conference in Amsterdam which was about social responsibility. And the term didn't exist. It started in the late 70s, people started using it. And this was the first World Conference on Social Responsibility at the Krasnopolski Hotel in Amsterdam. And I remember I went there, and there were people from Body Shop were there, Anita Roddick, and the people from Patagonia and Ben & Jerry's ice cream and so forth, and people from all over Europe talking about social responsibility. And I remember saying that I thought that what was going to happen was that the big corporations were going to kidnap the cliche for themselves and then set it up in any way that makes sense, the same way as they paint themselves green, any color you want. You know, what's important? Green? Okay, let's paint it all green. And so that I think that some of the things that we started doing, that we were doing 30 years ago in 1983, about letting people choose their bosses, choose their time, were nothing but common sense. But the fact is that common sense is a very difficult thing to perpetrate, because the organizations, they have a need to feed themselves. And so corporations are essentially entities that are looking to maximize economic gain to a relatively small number of shareholders or of people who are more talented or more able in commerce or in production than other people. Most of them start with things that are very valuable, such as new product ideas, new services, and so forth. It's always a fabulous start. At a certain point in time, the organization becomes more important, how you're organized, than the original idea, which is lost somewhere along the line, as it is at the hotel. And someone who started a small inn for a stagecoach in Utrecht, now 300 years later, is a chain of 3-star small where you have to check in and check out and follow all the rules of the hotel. So in these 30 years, social responsibility, green awareness, all of this has been forced upon the entities, and the corporation will attend to that by creating a department, by giving it to their marketing department to say how terribly green I am, and whatever they want to hear, tell them. And they're very sophisticated, very complex machinery, and there isn't the big bad guy in the back who's just smoking cigars and trying to make as much money as he can by oppressing the people. This is something that has gone away a long time ago. It's also a very complicated exercise. The managers are not very good at it. It's a very difficult process. 92% of the companies do not survive more than 20 years. So it's not a successful process as a whole. And so I think what we did 30 years ago was just to be very simple when this started, the social responsibility, is to say that it's obvious to us that if you don't solve the issue of your context, and you don't solve the issue of making it interesting for the employee or making him feel like getting up on Monday morning, then the rest will never work. The rest is just terribly hard work. And so we, for a long time, the only thing we asked our employees was, do they feel like getting up on Monday morning and going to work? And if the answer was mostly yes, then the company was in great shape. Everything else would take care of itself. It's not surprising that the people who have control never give up control on their own. You have no instance in history, you have no instance in religion, you have no instance in politics, you have no situation in which the people who have control look at a concept and decide to hand over the control and hope that everything is going to be okay. And in my case, I wasn't hoping anything. I was absolutely sure that these people, if they wanted to get up on Monday morning and they went to do it, they would find a good way of doing that. It's just, to me, it was always human nature. It was always an assumption that nobody, think about it, I don't know anybody, I've never met, and people say there are such people, but I've never met anybody who goes to work only for the money. It looks that way sometimes. When you think about it, it might be someone who's going for the money to exchange it for something else they need, for a barter, for freedom, or for their family, or for something of the sort. But the person who is there just for that salary and doesn't care about anything whatsoever is a rare, very rare person. I don't think I've ever met one like that. We have a few hundreds, and now over the years, many thousands of people who've gone through the process. Some of them have not bought into it, have not believed in it, have stayed a while, and they said, this is not for me. A lot of people don't feel well with so much responsibility, because it's also true that when you tell a person that you're not interested in how much they work or when they work, as long as they get it done, to a lot of people, that's scarier than saying you have to be here by 8:05, otherwise I'm going to fire you. And a lot of people have been conditioned, which is why we were always interested in going back to the schools, because people in the business world have been conditioned in schools already to sit down and shut up and listen, and I tell you this about American history and you spit it back to me in the test, and then I let you go. And so when they get to the company, they say, what do you want me to do? Be here at 8 to 10, leave at 5 to 5? Okay. But I think when you start freeing even these, almost I think the entire humanity, you start freeing them of this and saying, I don't care anymore what time you come and go. Can you do this for me? And I'm not going to follow you around to know whether you did it. That the great majority of people will. And the ones that don't, that's why humanity is so interesting and so diverse. There's lots of people who won't. This society that we live in today, especially since 1989, is one theme only. It's really economic. It's really money oriented in all respects. And so this has been set up so that it requires a leap of faith for you to give up control of the economic certainty. And to me, it never did, because I thought always that the economic sum of a collective amount of people who are doing what they want has to be much higher in the long run than getting people to do what I want them to do. I remember when my son was 3, we were sitting in the bathtub, and he asked me, he said, "Daddy, why do we exist?" And it's very interesting that at 3, you have a question like that. This is a question that will stay for the rest of your life. The very important questions, which is, why do you love? How do you love? Why do you exist? How do you exist? How do you make a balance between the things you want to do, the things you need to do, the people that need you, the people you need? These are all the very important questions of life, and to those I have no answer whatsoever. What do we use our time for? You know, how do you make your life worthwhile for what you need to do, and not what other people will recognize, or what you're going to leave behind, or what kind of legacy, or what kind of a name? But how do you manage the time that's given to you on Earth? That's the one that's the difficult one for me. So I'm constantly changing direction and trying out new variations for myself of how do I make this the most valuable. And the most valuable, that really has nothing to do with production or money or number of projects or effort or hard work. But also, I don't know how to make good use of this time that's available, and to manage and to this balance between the family and love and happiness and work and projects and so forth. This is the difficult thing that I'm constantly weighing again and again. I always come up with a different answer, which means that the answer is not clear at all. And the fact is that the way we run life on a very economical sphere and an axle that is really economic in many respects, it's very easy to leave love for later. And that's a silly thing when you already have it. It's a very silly mistake that a lot of people do, because they feel they have no choice. And when they realize they've now spent too much time at the office and in traffic, hoping that with a 2-week vacation they'll be okay. Now, I think that Holland is an example in so many different ways, that I think that Holland, Scandinavia, maybe 8-10 countries around the world are especially ready and prepared and mature for their own historical reasons to adopt change in organizations, and it is still a leftover of the legacy and the fear of control that holds it back. When you look at all of these statistics and you put them together, you look at the social net, you look at the health system, you look at the pension system, you look at the amount of giant corporations for such a small country, you realize that all of the stakes are in place. If there's an economic downturn and there's a temporary crisis, it doesn't say very, very much about the structural situation of Holland. But one that has this disposition to understand what a post-capitalist society could do is certainly, Holland is among the few countries that could make use of this leap of faith, could make use of this giving up control, because it already has so many cultural aspects and so many economical aspects to it from history that doesn't want to go back to running Batavia. You know, it doesn't run back in black suits and black hats and velvet things in the tropics. That's long, long gone for Holland, and it's ready with this amount of Montessori schools, with this amount of corporations that have a tremendous impact per employee, per GDP, etc. It's socialized enough, it's capitalist enough that it can find the best variations of this together. And I think what stops it still is just the fact that there's a cultural backlog, a build-up, a cultural that has to do with control still. And that's the very last one that has to go. But as a society, it's probably one of the ones that's closest
Holland
make
has
the
to
shift.
burn its books like you did.
A little bit of its past has to go still because there's still a very strong um, force, which is either mercantile or patrician in the sense of all of this religious buildup that became a very structured society. And it's done so much in the 50s, 60s, 70s to undo this that there's very few of these clusters left, but they're still strong enough to maintain control. And this giving up control is a very difficult thing to do. But I'd say that Holland is positioned to do so much earlier than most other countries.
It still is, you think?
Well, definitely. I just think that it doesn't look that way because you're in the middle of a crisis when fear takes over and people pull the rein of the horse. You know, anybody who's a horseman knows that you're going down the hill, for example, and suddenly the horse starts going too fast and you're afraid, you pull the reins. That's the very worst thing you could do because the horse now has to go down with his head up when he needs the free flow of his head to become stable. And then suddenly the horse slips and you say, see, I told you it's a dangerous place, but it's you who pulled the reins. And so this is the way it is, I think, in Holland. The whole crisis, the euro, this, should I be in the middle of that? How did we get into this? What's happening to Philips? Where's Freddie Heineken? What happened to this whole world is the one that's scary. People say, where's ABN AMRO? What happened to Rabobank? But the fact is that in the course of Dutch history, this is all very irrelevant. It's just all it looks very urgent when you read the paper today. But the fact is that this is all a very small effect on the long-term decision that the Dutch had made a long time ago to give up a lot of this structural, hierarchical control stiffness, which is in the corporate world, which is in the political world, which is in the religious world, and which is not necessary for the Dutch mentality. And it's been, and slowly over the years, this will become clear. It's just not a good moment for you to take a picture of it.